On today's Locked On Bucks, we open up the mailbag and get into all the questions that you guys had, mostly about the young players on this team. Some of the cap-related questions have since been answered. Very interesting one about Giannis and his legacy and future here in Milwaukee as well. So all things Locked On Bucks fans questions. We get into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and you can find us on YouTube as well, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have wound down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We put the call out there for a little over a week to get your questions in. We thought things were starting to wind down for the Bucks. Little did we know they had one move left to make with the signing of Gary Trent Jr. We got into that basically on 2 episodes. If you missed that, it's the previous 2 from this week. But now we're relatively certain that all those moves are out of the way. So what better time than now to open up the mailbag and to address the questions that you guys have sent to us the last few weeks, whether that be through email or tweets to me, Camille, and Frank. So getting into the questions that you guys had, there was one theme that stood out the most, not surprising here because it's what we've talked about a lot outside of the second apron, and that is the youth on this team. Quite a few questions about the young players. So let's start there as the first question we get to comes to us from Lee. Says, everyone always talks about MarJon's offense and confidence, but the striking thing to me is how he gets eaten alive by every screen and routinely being in the wrong spot on defense. I think the Pacers series, Chris cussed him out pretty extensively for being in the wrong place. How much of his lack of defensive execution do you put on the changing staffs, and how much is on him? So before you get to your thoughts on that, Frank, it's MarJon's kind of been a hot button topic here lately. As you know, we talked about, hey, he put up pretty good numbers offensively in terms of like the back of the basketball card numbers in the first couple of games, but then kind of stalled in game 3 in the summer league. And I think some of what Lee asked there is by and large what we've seen most of from MarJon Beauchamp is you see some of those flashes, but you see a lot more where those flashes aren't really there. So how much of that to you do you think has to do with the changes of coaching staffs that he talked about with Eric Name, 3 of them in 3 years, the confidence in how his playing time kind of went by the wayside? And how much of it do you think is just, look, this is just who MarJon is?
Well, shout out to Lee, because I was actually thinking the other day about how like people index to this idea that like it's a confidence issue at times, like he's not confident enough. And that's always felt like a little bit of like a weird, like we're trying to psychoanalyze a guy. And I don't know that like what I've seen from MarJon and the issues that I've seen to me scream like this is a confidence thing. Like what you're seeing in Vegas and what people are complaining about in Vegas in particular is that he's like jacking shots and taking bad, like step back threes and all that. Like that's not a lack of confidence, right? That's kind of a lack of good decision making. I think we talked about decisiveness. That was, I think, the big takeaway single word from Eric Name's story on MarJon kind of right before the Vegas Summer League started. And that's kind of been the thing I always index on both ends, just making quick decisions and not kind of like hesitating a beat, basically, anytime he does anything. And I think I'd also 100% agree with Lee's, like, I mean, his offense was not like a problem to me last year, right? If he was giving you 90% of kind of like Andre's like defensive intensity, energy, again, Andre fouled a ton. So it's not like Andre was some like, super effective NBA defender as a rookie. I think he got a bad whistle as well. But if Andre or if MarJon 2 years ago had AJ Green's positional sense, he wouldn't have lost minutes to AJ Green like at various points during that rookie year. And I remember thinking, I think a lot of us thought like, why the hell are they playing AJ Green over MarJon Beauchamp? He's like your first round pick versus this two-way guy, like, freaking, pale as a ghost. Like, come on, like what is this? Like, there goes me racially I always say that, teams shouldn't racially profile AJ Green defensively. Like you try to attack him, they're like, oh, this guy can actually keep the ball in front of him. And I'm talking smack about AJ being a pale white guy. Sorry, AJ. But yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at it, right? Yeah, he's had 3 coaches in 2 years. You know who else has had 3 coaches in 2 years? AJ Green. You know who's had 2 coaches in 1 year? Andre Jackson, right? So I don't think, certainly those players, I mean, were they helped by having so many coaches in such a short period of time? No, but they've had the same experience in terms of upheaval and whatever else has been going on with the franchise. And clearly MarJon was kind of the odd man out. And I don't know. I know you guys reference like, he had some injuries and stuff. I don't know. I just like assumed that was like, I never thought those were like, I'm not saying they were fake injuries, but like anytime guys who aren't playing, like keep having random injuries, I just assume it's kind of like, he's got like
he's injured. Yeah.
He's got like a little thing bothering him. So like, you're going to not dress tonight and we're just going to put you on the injury report. Right. Like, I wasn't like worried that like, oh man, Andre would be playing or MarJon would be playing if not for these back spasms,
You thought it was like Nick Nurse pulling himself out of the Bucks coaching search.
Yeah, I let me say this. I would say if Doc had wanted to play MarJon Beauchamp, I think MarJon Beauchamp would have been off the injury report to end last season. Again, I'm just sort of speculating, but yeah. So I don't know. It's just it's tough because on the one hand, 2 years is not the end of the world. We see guys, there isn't a linear growth pattern for every prospect. Obviously you don't want guys like completely standing still or going backwards. But I don't think he went backwards from year 1 to year 2. But certainly like what we've seen in Vegas, like I don't know that you can take anything really positively from it. And again, he's in a weird role because he's kind of trying to do a lot when, it's obviously that's not going to be what he'll do eventually if he gets an opportunity with the Bucks this fall. So it's just hard, but I think also, I mean, he's got a $4.7 million team option for 25-26 that they have to pick up by, I think, the end of October. And so, I was talking to, kind of messaging with some people about it the other day. I was like, would you pick this up if you're the Bucks?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, one thing I would caution, it's not like if you drop it that like, oh, now you got $5 million to go spend on Gary Trent or something like that. It's not quite like that. But, it's you kind of compare like that number versus a minimum salary because you're having to fill roster spots, right? But almost $3 million in extra money under, the second apron, fewer tax dollars. I mean, that is a real tangible thing. And if you don't think MarJon's going to give you any more than, some random guy, well, not even random, Bucks have picked up some, I'd say, pretty talented guys on minimum deals this summer. I mean, if you're the Bucks, you probably say like, yeah, we got a bunch of young guys, next man up, Andre, AJ, we got both AJs, all these guys who, I mean, has MarJon outplayed Ryan Rollins this summer, right? Like it's tough. So I think the Bucks are kind of approaching, I think, a bit of a difficult and unfortunate decision here where I don't know what your thought is. I think maybe, I think there's probably a better chance than not, given where they are financially, that they don't pick up that
they don't
option, right? Which wouldn't preclude them from bringing him back.
Yeah.
He would still have bird rights on him, but it would just be a low number. But again, like, is he going to do something big this year to earn a big, salary? Like, I don't.
Time to talk to you about our friends over at FanDuel. We all love sports, so much so that we never want them to stop. But as the sports start to wind down, we get fewer games, and that means sports aren't sporting like we want them to. Playoffs are out of the picture. We've now moved on to other sports. so you wonder where you're going to get your fix. But FanDuel is what keeps you going, and the sport's out there for you whenever you want. All you have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
I don't think anybody's expecting that.
Was it you and I that were talking about this, or was I listening to, it may have been something Kevin Pelton was doing the other day, where they were talking about those very rare examples of when you don't pick up that rookie, the 4th-year contract, but you ultimately bring the player back. I think it's happened once in the last.
Kevon Looney is the guy. I was talking. I think we were talking about, and I mentioned Kevon Looney, and maybe there's been others, but it is rare. Yeah, for sure.
Very, very rare. It sounds like what you were getting at. I don't really have a strong feeling one way or another, but if you forced me to choose today, I would lean towards, I guess I would say the chances are greater that they don't pick that up, because, the other part that we talked about a little bit before with MarJon's first few years too was, and again, it's the whole, well, how much of it is like actually a reason versus how much of it is we're just finding these things that can fit the narrative of an excuse of, well, he was hurt and, well, he had 3 different coaches. But as you pointed out, the other young guys did too. And to the other point of that, well, there was positional blockage that you had guys that were in front of him. But that hasn't changed, right? And if you're able to retain Gary Trent Jr., assuming this is a success, I mean, there's going to be more blockage there. We assume Andre Jackson Jr. is already ahead of him and is going to continue to grow. AJ Green is already ahead of him. So it's not like magically that positional blockage is going to be gone. Pat Connaughton may be here too if he picks up that final year of his
he's got
player option.
Three leaf partners, whatever, his real estate thing. Like Pat doesn't want to go anywhere. He's got business to do in this town, man.
Well, and I don't remember if it was on the show or if it was one of the non on the show discussions, but we joked too of, man, the alternate irony here would be when Pat Connaughton does have the bounce back season and outplays that deal and declines his player option and signs elsewhere for more money next season.
We'll put that in the problems that I would desperately love to have. But I think I was listening to Zach Lowe today, referred to Pat Connaughton feeling like he had aged 5 years in the last year, which unfortunately feels kind of apt, which is especially sad because do you remember last media day, he was talking about how he was hoping to get some of that burst back and athleticism and blah, blah, blah. And then it just didn't feel like it was there, which, I mean, he's 30 years old. It's not like he's 34 or 35, right? I mean, you wouldn't think that he would just kind of be toast. He hasn't had major injuries or anything like that. So I don't know. It's kind of tough, but yeah, I think the other thing with MarJon, I mean, look, if you could have traded him for some sort of positive, bad second round pick, I would expect the Bucks would have probably already looked long and hard into doing that. I don't know that that's feasible, right? But at this point, honestly, I would kind of I haven't kind of gone through the exercise, but I would sort of look around and say who are other kind of need a change of scenery young guys, but maybe a big guy that I was just looking at Day'Ron Sharp, who's been pretty productive but hasn't played a lot for the Nets. He's going into his 4th year, so the Nets would have to make some decision on him. I have no idea if the Nets would want MarJon for Day'Ron Sharp. I don't even know if the salaries would be doable in a trade, but something kind of like that, right? Just, hey, you take MarJon and the decision on paying him, and we'll get maybe just, fill in a different position that, isn't as blocked. Because for him, it's he's got to beat out these other young dudes, and then he's got to beat out, Taurean Prince and Pat Connaughton and all these other dudes who, let's be honest, I don't think any of us are too bullish that that's going to happen.
Sadly, he's making more money than MarJon is by more than $1 million. So that one would be tough. And look,
back to the drawing board.
any team that deals with the Bucks too should say, unless it's, hey, if you can get Jerry Reinsdorf on the phone, then you're probably fine. But otherwise, it's okay. So we're thinking the 2031 first and second to do that. What are you guys thinking?
It almost happened. So sad, Daron. That's because he's in his fourth year when rookie contracts balloon a fair bit. So last year he only made 2.2. So could have happened, but alas.
All right, let's keep it moving here with some of the young guy questions here. Anil says, which of the young guys elevating their game would have the biggest impact on the team and their success this season? So we're looking at, again, we'll lump MarJon in there. Andre Jackson Jr., I suppose you would put the two rookies in there, but I think for a technicality, we'll put them in there. But I would be shocked if it's either of those two guys. And AJ Green. So of those names, I guess I would say MarJon. I guess I would say Andre Jackson Jr. if he can continue.
This is just a MarJon Beauchamp podcast. That's what this is.
If he can continue to build on what he did last year and the fouls come down and you figure out something for him offensively in a way to keep him on the floor for 18 minutes, let's just say, I think that's probably the guy.
Yeah, I would agree. I put on my Andre Jackson Jr. skepticism hat the other day about his offense, but I think when you think about this team's needs, right? What is something that the Bucks are probably going to need more of in the playoffs than what they have right now? And do any of the young guys provide that, right? I think Andre's defense is kind of the most obvious thing. Maybe not even just defense, but just sort of like energy, period. And kind of just like the effort and stuff. It's like, I think, like, was it the first jump ball of Summer League? Like, he almost like stole the ball, chasing it into the backcourt. He just does stuff like that. And again, like, as much as I'm not bullish on sort of his offensive upside, I think that, there is a path for him to be that sort of, energy injection type guy on the defensive end. And, if any position the Bucks could use something like that, it stands to reason it would be, with a switchable wing kind of defender. And I think, Andre certainly, again, like, is he actually like the Bucks' best wing defender right now when you factor in fouls and, all the small things about team defense? Maybe not, right? But I think he's certainly the most talented wing defender the Bucks have. And so, you just cross your fingers that he kind of figures that out, and then they can kind of scheme around him offensively enough that, it's not kind of outweighing what he can do defensively. So yeah, I would say Andre's probably the guy. And, I think, like you said, the rookies, I think, are kind of just, you roll out, just, AJ, I think, is just sort of too young, again, especially through the lens of like playoff basketball, right?
Yeah.
Would be awesome if AJ gets some opportunities during the season and maybe has like a fun game here or there, but like, to expect that he's going to be.
Well, I suppose technically that's the answer, is if, like, holy cow, he's actually playing this year and he's giving them something, then it's definitely AJ Johnson. But neither of us anticipate him being in a position to do that. So it's mostly looking at the other three, and then the guy, me of all people, forgetting to mention Chris Livingston as well.
Has had a good summer league.
Yeah.
I was going to say too, like, I mean, I think the Bucks really could use another like shot creator, and this is one of those things. Like, signing Gary Trent was obviously a no-brainer. I am curious how much sort of second unit shot creation he can do, because I think certainly, like, the efficiency metrics suggest that to the extent he creates shots, it's probably not very efficient offense. But I think he's got a little bit more kind of on ball juice than Malik Beasley. But that said, DeLon Wright, as much as I like him, like, he's not, anchoring a second unit and scoring, 9 points in 3 minutes or something like that, right? That's not his game. And then again, not that they need, Jordan Clarkson or prime Jamal Crawford or something like that. But, maybe it's not this year, but if AJ Johnson, in a year or whatever it might be, can become like a little like bench spark plug type guy, right? Like that's kind of what Tyrese Maxey was as a rookie. Again, that's a really high bar for AJ as in his rookie year, but maybe again offset it by a year or something like that. I think that would be useful to have, especially if you can get a guy who's not, he may be skinny, but he's pretty like long, and I think defensively has shown he's got tools, which is also like one of those sort of hidden things with AJ. Like he doesn't. If you the sort of the optimistic projection of him, and I'm sure we got some AJ Johnson questions, but the optimistic projection of AJ, I think what's so exciting for me about him is that he doesn't like project to have like some like fatal flaw, right? Like Tyler Smith, like it's like, wow, he's probably never going to be like more than a passable defender, right? That's like the knock on him. With AJ, it's like, why can't he be a good defender, right? Like, why can't he be a good shooter? Why can't he be like a great open court finisher? Why can't he be like a good enough passer, right? Like you can sort of like, again, because we're extrapolating from almost zero, like sort of paint a very pretty picture of this, but again, we'll probably have to wait a minute to see, but we can hang on to all that optimism for maybe a little while.
One other, we got quite a few other ones about the young guys, but let's put a little break in there and get to one that I think should be relatively quick and easy here. And that came
is this the Ersan Ilyasova retired number question? Did we get one of those? No. Okay.
No, we got 77 of those questions. Oddly enough, but,
which number would even be retired if it was Ersan, right?
No, yeah. This one comes to us from Q on Twitter, who asks about. I said this should be a brief one, but I think there's a lot of context to put
there are no brief answers with me, Justin.
But,
you know that.
So he asks about the salary floor, and are there any teams left that haven't hit the salary cap floor? His question was, could they offer bigger money to remaining free agents? That's basically, long story short, no. We're just not seeing those offers anymore. The fact that the Bucks get Gary Trent Jr. on a vet minimum, where it does play into potentially for the Bucks, but then we're going to be the big damp wet blanket to put on that is taking on salary in a trade. I think there's one team left. I think the Utah Jazz still have money to take on, but
I'm not doing business, Danny Ainge.
Well, and even though I know you said you can talk, Frank, look, it boils down to this. What do the Bucks have to attach to any player that you're looking to? Hey, can you take this salary for us just to get us under the second apron? The whole conversation of what are you even going to do when you're in the second apron is one thing, but you have no assets other than 2031 first and second round draft pick to attach to it.
You're saying that MarJon Beauchamp is not the sweetener needed to
well, and again, you can't. I mean, well, technically you could, right? If it gets you under the second apron, then you can aggregate contracts. I believe we had seen.
Well, and also it's a bit different with. I mean, if you're basically doing a salary dump where you're taking back no money or only a little bit of money, then it's not like an aggregating trade anyway.
Yeah.
So that would be fine. But yeah, I just don't think that, and we've talked, I know you and I talked about this, but a lot of psychic energy has been put into it based on my comments and my Twitter timeline. A lot of energy has been put into trade machines and all this. Bucks fans trying to figure out how they, take Pat Connaughton and stuff and get the Bucks under the second apron, or create enough room to use the taxpayer mid-level or whatever. And I don't know. I saw enough of it that I like kind of did some quick like, okay, what would that mean? Blah blah. But like, I just never, I think we're in the same boat, Justin. I just don't think the Bucks, like, you're just not going to give up an asset for what, right? Like, yes, it's better to be under the second apron, but like, okay, so you could aggregate, MarJon and Bobby for someone making $15 million. Like, I just don't. And then you're hard capped. at the second
At the
apron,
fir-
which, again, the Bucks are over the second apron, which is not good, but they are not hard capped because they haven't done one of those things that hard caps you. So I just don't think that's going to be a priority to get under the second apron this year. I'm sure there'd be scenarios that the Bucks would do it because they'd save a ton of money under the tax as well if you were able to do that. But at this point, like, what is that offer that's going to come along that wasn't available before, right? I just don't think that's going to happen. And there's nothing, again, other than the aggregation piece, and eventually there'd be the kind of future draft pick freezing, which that's not trivial. But again, I think the Bucks will be under the second apron next summer because it's going to go up 10%. And again, Brooke Lopez, Chris Middleton, Bobby Portis, like Bobby may look for more money, but good chance maybe Bobby doesn't come back. I think Brooke and Chris, I think you would be resigning those guys for less if they came back. This would be my hypothesis. So that's kind of like part of the recipe of, how you might be able to bring Gary Trent back, right? As we were talking the other night, and probably wouldn't be able to do it for a full non-tax mid-level, but you may be able to do a taxpayer mid-level 1+1, and then see if he likes being here long enough to, basically take the Bobby Portis wink, wink. I'll play for a year for, $5 million, and then you'll give me probably a stupid amount of money later.
A lot more with a player option too. And then another player option. There's an interesting question about Giannis and something that happened 3 years ago. So we'll pivot to that coming up after our break here on Locked On Bucks. All right. So the question comes to us, one of two questions. We'll get to the first one here from Zach, who asks, what would you set the over-under on, he says, additional finals appearances in the Giannis era? I'm going to take that and just change it to, what would you set the over-under on finals appearances during the Giannis era? So already including 2021, I'll just say 1.5.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to say the same.
Yeah. I think that's the big question. Can they get one more? And to me, that, again, that's more about, Dame's age, Chris' age, Brooks' age than Giannis's age. But if they got one more finals appearance in the Giannis era, given, we have no idea what kind of is beyond the cliff here, which again isn't pleasant to think about, but there is a very real possibility that you kind of approach this cliff. Maybe it's not in a year because you do bring back, Chris and Brooke are still, good players, and you're able to sign them for less, and kind of, maybe you can keep Gary Trent or, one of these young guys for the first time in, a decade actually hits or something like that. But yeah, I think that's kind of the sobering reality, right? Is that, I think there is an element of kind of last dance this year. And the difference is, like, Chris Middleton and Brooke Lopez, don't hate John Horst and desperately want to get out of Milwaukee or something like that, right? So for a price, I'm sure they would like to come back. But, what we don't talk about with the Bucks, which is pretty awesome, is we never talk about the fact that they're in the repeater tax for the second straight year. They're probably going to have a payroll upwards of like 260, high 260, almost 270 million. This team costs more than the Packers, by the way. Like, I was looking this up recently. Like, I think
what about the Brewers? Where does
the Brewers were at? Like, the Brewers were at like, I think 130-ish a year ago. So basically, the Bucks payroll is like 2x the Brewers. Shout out to Mark Attanasio, just not paying a lot of money for a team, and people like the Brewers, and yay tailgating and scrappy young teams and getting away with kind of being a cheapskate. But yeah, like, at some point, like, worst case scenario, if they go out in the first round again, like, are you going to pay $250 million for a team next year that has gone out in the first round 3 straight years? Like, shout out to Jimmy Haslam for, like, he shows up and the playoff luck completely runs out, but they've just continued to pay through the nose for this team. even while a team like Denver has been, sending salary out with Reggie Jackson to, giving up picks to send out Reggie Jackson to save money and things like that. I think the Bucks again deserve a ton of credit. We'll see how long that lasts. I hope they're good enough to justify that kind of continued investment from the ownership group. But so far, I think basically ever since the PJ Tucker non-signing, that rest of that offseason, they kind of spent as much as they possibly could, and they've kind of been doing that ever since.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it on the one of the more recent shows that we did on the hey, here's the moves on with John Horst as the GM that would stand out the most is
man, Jay Crowder move.
That one.
I think the Jay Crowder, probably because it's the most recent. That was what I was thinking when you guys were going through that list with you and Camille. Because first off, anything pre-championship is fine.
Yeah.
Because everything that happened before then ultimately ended up in, we got to be in the building to see Giannis score 50 points and win a championship. Like, our life is fulfilled as Bucks fans to some extent. So I'm not changing anything that happened before that, Thon Maker draft, Jabari Parker draft, great, fine. It all set up what needed to happen. But since then, to me, especially because it's so recent, and man, it would be nice to have some of those second round picks back just to have a little bit of, you could throw into something that you could, throw into a trade. That one to me always kind of jumps out, even though like the stakes were not the highest. That one kind of hurts. At least with the Serge Ibaka Dante deal, you got the pick that turned into Tyler Smith, so you got at least a reasonable asset. Which in the grand scheme of the universe, like trading Dante and getting like what effectively was a really high second round pick at the time, not terrible. Obviously he's done really well, but it's taken a couple years for him to get to the point where he's at, and it kind of is what it is. But good luck to Dante.
Yeah, I mean, that was the complication. Was just, I think for me, the big part of it, you just come back to, look, I get the framing of this is Brook Lopez insurance, but like, if Brook Lopez doesn't play,
you're screwed anyway.
You have much bigger problems. So like, it's like worrying about insuring a car that you just bought for $500. Like, who cares if it gets destroyed? Taking out collision insurance on it. Who cares? I'll just go buy a new one for that cost. So that was the big piece for me, because I mean, Dante was leaving. I think the big piece was all those ones that we touched on. The PJ Tucker one, which gets blown up more than in hindsight. You could have used him for a year probably, and then we started to see this is what we thought you would be concerned with. But the larger point was just the asset management. Yeah,
and the thing is too, like with PJ, I mean, the reason they lost to the Celtics that year was not because they didn't have. Yeah. It was not like defense, right? Like they just couldn't score, right? I mean, Drew was carrying way too much of a load and could not score, and Giannis was like literally carrying that team on his back, and having PJ would have just made that, offensively even worse, right? So, of course, I mean, in the grand scheme of the universe, different chain of events happen. Does Chris ever slip on the wet spot? We can play that game. So, I would have rather had PJ on a 2-year contract if he would have taken that. But, it kind of is what it is. And,
We got quite a few more questions to get to. So we're going to break this off into a 2-parter with some more of your mailbag questions. I'll give a little bit of a teaser for what's coming up in part 2. There's some Tyler Smith questions that are out there. We have some more positional questions, and one of the potential weaknesses that this team has that you mentioned earlier on this episode, there is a question about that. And people asking about Frank's TV and movie viewing as well. So we have those questions coming up as well. So we'll break this off into a part 2 and to get to the rest of those questions on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Bucks, part 2 of the mailbag with me and Frank. That comes your way tomorrow, a special Saturday edition of it on Locked On Bucks.